What's up guys, Starlink here. Now I know what you're probably thinking. My god, it's another person talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Haven't we heard enough about this game already? And you're probably right, but I figured, why not add my 2 cents into the mix? So here we are. Final Fantasy VII is one of those timeless classics that, despite its appearance graphically, still holds up very well in terms of gameplay to this day. Its story and cast of characters have etched their way into many gamers' hearts over the years since its release on the PlayStation in 1997. Many people wanted to see this beloved classic remade and introduced in a more modern light for many years now, and despite some teases and delays along the way, that's finally what we ended up getting with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Well, sort of. This is only the first part of a game that's split into multiple sections after all, something that I wasn't too fond of initially. Now, being a remake of a game that's held in such high regard, there was bound to be some concerns found along the way no matter how great it ended up being. Not everyone is going to like some of the changes made here, like the game being split into several parts for example. Others may even find some of the new story elements so polarizing that they choose to write off the game completely. I had my own personal doubts on the remake myself at first, but ultimately in the end, I think it turned out far better than I expected. The cast of characters are brought to life thanks to some fantastic voice work. Even side characters have been more fleshed out this time around with events that help you form a much deeper bond with them compared to the original game. They even go so far as to add a bunch of voiced dialogue to the NPCs conversing in the background, which just adds to that whole living, breathing world element. Environments, while somewhat linear by today's standards, are huge in scope compared to how the game was represented on the PS1 many years ago. It's simply breathtaking to see each environment faithfully represented and even expanded upon within the game. From exploring the Sector 7 slums to confronting the towering skyscraper of Shinra HQ. The city of Midgar is simply huge and brought to life thanks to modern-day graphical design, and it looks amazing. Even some enemies that were once just regular battles in the original game are full-fledged boss fights this time around. That's pretty neat. Also of note here is the music. Every track found in the original game is faithfully represented here with some modern-day touches, and it sounds fantastic. Even some of the music that isn't heard until further on in the original game is present here via a little side activity that has you going around hunting for music tracks for a record player, and that can be its own fun little distraction. Now when it comes to the combat, I was a little worried at first when I heard it was taking a more action-oriented approach. Now don't get me wrong here, I enjoy a good action RPG of course. I'm just one of those people who think that turn-based RPGs still hold their own very well to this day. I mean, just look at how well games like Persona 5 or Dragon Quest XI have sold for a good example of this. Both are modern games with a turn-based battle system and they play great. Square Enix chose to spice things up a bit with the FF7 remake though, and honestly, they did an amazing job here. The combat feels great and really well balanced as long as you play on normal. You can't just mindlessly mash the attack button to win here. You have to utilize your abilities and magic to deal out the damage. Sometimes it's even better to be on the defensive in battles, taking your time to block, dodge, or even parry an attack while you wait for an opening to strike. Swapping between characters on the fly during battle is almost required to stay alive at times, and even encouraged, particularly during boss fights, as an enemy's main focus is usually the character you are in control of. Thankfully though, the AI that handles any character that you are not in control of during a fight is very competent at staying alive. In fact, I think they did a much better job at blocking attacks or even evading for cover than I did at times. Overall, the combat is much more enjoyable than I thought it would be, and quite honestly one of the game's greatest strengths. It forces you to be mindful of your party at all times, looking for opportunities to stagger the enemy, which is when you can go to town dishing out the most pain. It's a system that works and makes every battle feel both challenging and satisfying to complete, especially on hard. Also of note here are the weapons. While there's very few to collect throughout the game, I love the customization options present here. Like you can have some that are geared towards more magical use or physical power, or an equal balance between the two. And each weapon is viable from beginning to end. Feel like going through the whole game with Cloud's iconic Buster Sword? You can do that here, and that's a pretty neat feature. As great as this game may be, however, it's not without its own set of flaws, of course. Some low-res textures stick out like a sore thumb and just look awful up close. There was even an instance during Chapter 9 that I took a look up at the sky above Wall Market to discover a texture of one of those big overhead lamps just floating in thin air. That one gave me a good laugh though. Also, there are some of these sequences at times when you have no other option other than to just simply walk to your destination, which I was fine with for parts during story events while your characters idly chat with one another, but it would be nice to have the option to run or even at least jog to your destination so it doesn't feel like such a slog at times, especially on repeated playthroughs. In the end though, these are only minor gripes in an otherwise fantastic game, and while many may have found the ending to be a bit on the extreme side, believe me, it took me some time to digest myself, it still has me interested in for what any future entries might bring to the table, for better or worse. So I actually have a question for you guys that's been floating around in my head for a while now. But say that Square Enix finally completes the Final Fantasy VII Remake, like they've released all the parts and the story is finished. Might take a while, but it's done, it's out the door. But anyways, they decide to move on to the next Final Fantasy game to see the remake treatment. If given the option, which title would you want to see a remake of? For me personally, that game would be Final Fantasy VI. Just imagining what that entire world and cast of characters would look like in a modern day graphical upgrade similar to what we've seen with Final Fantasy VII here would look amazing. And just imagining what the opera scene would look like in particular, that's a very pivotal moment in Final Fantasy VI. If done right and handled with enough TLC, it could be amazing. But anyways, I'm blabbing on too much. As always guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like. If not, drop a dislike. And as always, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Reach for the stars.